So here's the piece after all the clearance cuts are made. So I made the notch in the bottom to clear the plate, and this clearance cut down the center to clear the bottom of the pulley. So in theory, when this is put in flush to the bottom of that plate, there's clearance for everything. And this can set up against the plate. So what's left is I need to put my 2 mounting holes in and add a 3rd hole to the top center of this for mounting the structure for holding the camera assembly. So I'm going to work on that next. I also may drill and tap a couple holes in the back just in case I need to mount a light to it at some point. That way I don't have to take it out again to do that. I'm not exactly sure what size screws I'm going to use. There's not a whole lot of material. So if I did 1024 is about number 7. What's a number 7? 0.2. So number 10 needs a 0.2 clearance hole, which I have 2.3 on the with the wings, and good that way. 10 is a little bit on the big side. What's the major diameter? Sorry for the rambling. 1024 basic major is 1.629. So I think I can get a 1024 in this guy without having to worry about breaking out of the sides, because the top of the threads, from top of the thread to top of the thread, is 1.625, and then the actual hole drill is much smaller, or significantly smaller than that, because it needs to be able to cut the threads. So I think I am going to try and do 1024, and then I will probably also do 1024 here and 632s on the face. A number 10 screw to hold a PCB is kind of overkill, and it takes up a lot of PCB space. Usually I do 6s or smaller, just because it doesn't take up as much real estate on the card. So I'm going to get that laid out and drilled, and I'll cut back in when this is done and I'm ready to try and mount it on there. Okay, so here's the finished piece. I have 2 1024 screws or holes drilled and tapped in the bottom to mount it to the slot. I have a 1024 tapped hole in the top to mount the camera assembly to, and then 2 extra 632 holes spaced 1/2 inch apart and 1/4 inch away from this front edge. So hopefully that will take care of all my mounting problems, and I'm going to put them on with some 1024 1/2 inch screws, lock washer. The washer's there so the lock washer doesn't get caught in the slot on the sliding assembly. And now the near impossible task of actually getting this all together. There's also a plate on the back for the pulley assembly, so these screws will not go all the way in. That lock washer assembly is going to be crooked. That is not ideal, but there's just not enough space to make any of this any bigger. Okay, so that has grabbed. The other side. Now my goal is to adjust this assembly so it's resting on both screws down to give proper clearance, or to give maximum clearance between the pulley and the bracket. I think is right about there. Basically, as long as nothing drags on it, I'm good. let's check it out. As you can see, it's a really close fit between the pulley and that block, but nothing drags, so I'm good to go. If I do mount something into those 632 holes, they are drilled all the way through, so I have to make sure my screws aren't too long. If they are, they'll poke out the top and hit that pulley and lock up the works. So that's done. So what's next is I need to make some sort of assembly for the top to mount the camera mount. Mount the camera mount. Great wording. To mount the camera assembly, support assembly, or yeah, mount the camera mount across the top here. So my plan is to have a plate that comes off of here and comes up here, and if I'm lucky, possibly, with the carriages all the way up, I just barely don't clear that hole. So one thing I can do is make an L-shaped piece, so I can use these two slots to mount it to, have the L come up to here, and then span right over the top of this pulley. Another option, another option would be use this top slot, but as you can see, the stepper motor is encroaching on that space significantly, so that'd be tough, if not impossible, to use. Same thing with here and here, it's just too much stuff in the way. Huh, that's interesting. I did not drill these two holes. Or maybe I did. I can't remember. I don't think I drilled those two, so I can't remember what those were for. Oh, I do remember what those were for. At one point in time, this sensor was going to go up there, but then I had a problem with collisions with that guy, so I had to move it. So I did make those holes. I just totally forgot about them. So, anyways, back to this. I think these two hole slots here are my best choices for mounting. And then I can't go straight up because it just barely clips the screw, but I could make it go back, up, and then make sort of a crossbar T-piece that goes across the top. So we got our super tall L bracket here to clear this guy. Have that be 1.1 inches tall, just like this guy, and then cut, since this is above this surface, I can make some sort of giant T-plate that comes over, catches the top of this one when it's there, and then comes straight down and catches this guy. I'm going to sleep on this one a bit and see if I can think of anything better, because this ends up having to make two identical custom pieces here and here, and then the custom T-plate. The good news about the T-plate is I don't need it to be super structural. It's just to keep everything in a line and spaced right. Another option might be is if I make that bottom block hold, if I make the holder for this clamp directly to that bottom block, and then it's just a little too short. I was thinking I could clamp up here and then have it come over, have this clamp block be wide enough to catch these two, and then I only have to make two pieces. That still might, oops, can't lean on that. That still might be an option. I just have to clamp this. But this is also the focus adjustment. It is one piece with the body, but it would make it harder to refocus this, because I'd either have to take it completely out or loosen the bottom clamp, twist the body. That might work. So bottom clamp holds there, top clamp spans these two guys, and then to tweak the focus, we just loosen that bottom clamp and twist the whole assembly. I'm starting to like that one better, but again, I'm out of time for tonight, so I'm going to cut it off here, and then the next time I have some free time I'll come down and work on making these two L brackets. There's just no way around that other than drilling and tapping more holes in this plate. I could do that. The reason I don't want to is trying to get two holes exactly spaced out and even in this plate with all these odd edges is going to be pretty darn near impossible for me. Plus with the motor there, they'd still have to be out in this space. I could use my motor mounting bolts, but I really don't want to. I'd rather avoid that if I can. I do have a clearance issue here with the motor. I can't get a cap screw in here because the motor's right up against that hole. So this idea might be shot already. Another option is I could pull out these bolts and make a bracket, a couple little cutouts to clear these two bolts, have it go straight across both of these holes, or flip the bolts over so they screw into my new block. Yeah, flip them over, make them screw into my block. So that block both holds these two plates together and supports the camera. That'd put the upper camera mounting hole way up here, which would probably necessitate a longer block, because I'd have to get it at least up to here to clamp it. So you can see how this block would have to be extended, or put this whole assembly on a plate. The plate bolts in to this block and this new block, and then the camera clamps to that plate. Oh, thought I had a good solution. Turns out there's some pitfalls. So be it. Like I said, I'll think about it for a bit and see if I can think of any other nifty ways of doing this that doesn't require 3 separate parts. Well, did some thinking about the upper camera mount, and I think I came up with a plan. Originally I was going to make a plate that spanned these two bolts. They're 5mm metric, and they just barely have enough stick out on the backside to get the nut on, and then have a few threads on the outside. So had I put anything on this side, I'd have to probably lose the washer, and still I'd not have a whole lot of bolt left to thread on the back. I looked around and I don't have any 5mm bolts even this long. How long are those? They look to be around 70mm. I think the longest I had in my collection was like 50, so I wasn't going to cut it. And also, if I hadn't done just standoffs, which would need really long bolts, plan B was use an angle bracket. Well, if I do an angle bracket, I would have had to drill out to make clearance for these two bolts. And then it dawned on me, I don't need a lot of support. It just has to hold up the back end of the camera so it doesn't flop around. So I might as well use these two bolts. And these guys have plenty of thread going into the motor, so I don't have to worry about adding or subtracting washers to get everything to work. So digging around, I found some 1.5" angle, and my plan is to cut it off slightly long, narrower than these two bolts, so it can just fit inside and have these two hold it on, and then mount it so it's slightly above the pinion, sort of like so. So I'm going to go lop this off. And this is 1.25" aluminum angle, 1/16 inch thick. I would have liked something a little thicker, but I really didn't have any, so this is what I'm using. So I'm going to lop this off to length this way, and then also shorten it in both dimensions. Vertically, I'm going to make it so it's just shorter than this. So I'm going to figure out some random number, maybe 1 inch. What's 1 inch down? Okay, so 1 inch is too long, so I'll rub against that pulley. Let's go 0.75. Right about there. 0.75 is a little bit too short. Yeah. I'm thinking I want to go about 5/8, somewhere right in there. And then also shorten it in this dimension so it matches up to the top of this guy. Well, I take that back. It needs to match up the top of this guy plus the thickness of the piece I'm putting this way. And for that, I have some, it's about 0.2, which is an odd size. It has 0.189 thick. It's not 3/8. 5/16? Nope. 1/8. Huh. Oh, maybe 3/16. 3/16. So it's 3/16 by 3/4 bar stock. Nothing too fancy. And what I'm going to do for the connection to this guy is try and drill and tap 2 bolts into the end like that, and then 1 bolt out. Oh, you can't see. So 2 bolts in like that, and then 1 bolt down here to screw into this guy. I'll come back to that in a bit. First things first, I'm going to get this trimmed down so I can mount it in there. And then the next step will be transferring the 2 screw holes and the 2 screw holes for the downward plate. So I'll cut back in once I get it trimmed to length and ready to rock.